Let's get into the measurement issues, some of the government interventions when it comes to unemployment. So let's start with measurement. So, firstly, unemployment data is actually collected on a weekly basis. And there's always people moving in and out of the labor force. There's always people moving in and out of employment and unemployment, right? So there are massive, massive numbers of people. I mean, this huge flux, which basically means movement. So you got people moving in, people moving out in many in many different areas of Canada. So this is even in a relatively small population like Canada. This makes measurement somewhat difficult. Now, there is paperwork to fill out, of course, applying for things like unemployment insurance, applying for things like welfare, uh, your basic social assistance. There certainly are these paperwork trails that help. However, it's still a lot of data that gets processed on a weekly basis. So, this can cause some unemployment measurement discrepancies. And a lot of it has to do with simply not being able to follow up. It's interesting that when you fill out paperwork for the government actually does not verify the information that you're providing. When it comes to both welfare, basic social assistance, and when it comes to employment insurance, one of the questions that you have to fill out, so every week you get a questionnaire that you need to fill out. One of the questions that is on that questionnaire is, are you actively seeking work? And the response is yes. It's either yes or no. And the response is yes. You definitely put yes. Because if you put no, then they cut your funding. If you put down no, then your social assistance will end. But in putting down yes, do you actually, or are you actually seeking work? When it comes to employment insurance, the process is apply for employment insurance, get approved. And when you get approved, you actually get a statement, a letter that says you will receive this much money for this many months. And when you know how much money you're going to receive and you know for the length of time, often there's no reason to start looking for a job right away. We'll discuss this in a few minutes. Let's talk about some of the issues with the measurement then. So, first off, we have this idea that some unemployed are not really looking hard for a job. This means that the unemployment statistic might not be as accurate as it should be. Recall that in order to be unemployed, you must be looking for a job. There are some people who say that they are actively seeking work. However, they're not really doing it. These individuals might be sitting at home, playing on their computers, going out for walks, going, to do exercise. So doing something other than actually looking for a job, right? But that means that they should be counted as not in the labor force. However, they're being counted as unemployed, which means that the unemployment rate is reported as being higher than it really should be. And oftentimes, again, they do this because they need to receive those unemployment benefits, whether it be social assistance or the most basic social assistance, welfare, or whether it be those those employment insurance benefits. Yes, I'm looking for work. You haven't done anything. So simply so that they can receive the benefits. Right? So they're not actually unemployed because they're not filling that requirement of actively seeking work. They just say that they're actively seeking work. And we also have another group of people who are working under the table in addition to collecting benefits. So they might be collecting that basic social assistance, welfare, as well as collecting unemployment benefits, but they're working. They're working under the table because they're collecting this money from the government, and at the same time, they're going to work and perhaps just receiving a cash payment for the work that they've done. Maybe their employer is fine with that. Maybe their employer has a way of writing that off so that they don't get dinged. Or perhaps they're paying them a little bit less. So it doesn't matter. The tax situation, doesn't really affect them. Right. So there are ways that people actually, basically misreport what's going on. Some of it perhaps a little bit more innocent, others, less innocent, perhaps even criminal in nature. And we also have this interesting case of discouraged searchers. So ultimately, when you're unemployed, you're going to engage in a job search. And when you engage in a job search, that means that you're actively seeking employment. What happens if you're looking for work, you're looking for work, you're looking for work, you're looking for work, and a long period of time goes by? 6 months, 9 months, a year. At what point do you just say, forget it? I just don't care anymore. Like I'm just totally drained. You're mentally drained. You're just tired. You're depressed. Everything is going wrong. You just cannot find a job. And therefore you give up. You reach essentially your breaking point where your body, your mind just says, I can't do anymore. This is known as a discouraged searcher. Now, the interesting thing about discouraged searchers is that when we have a discouraged searcher, the unemployment rate actually goes down. That's probably not the way that it should be. But mathematically, that's what happened. So you've got the number of unemployed actually goes down. And the labor force also goes down. But the number of unemployed as a percentage goes down more than the labor force goes down as a percentage. And therefore, we get a reduction in the unemployment rate. So do this yourself. Actually, you can show this yourself. Just imagine you've got an unemployment rate equaling the unemployed divided by the labor force. And you can just make up some numbers. I'll make up some for you. We've got the unemployment rate equaling, let's say we've got 5 unemployed people, and we've got 10 people in the labor force, which means that we have an unemployment rate of 50%. Now let's imagine that one of these workers becomes discouraged, or sorry, one of these searchers becomes discouraged, which means that they stop looking for work. So now they're no longer in the labor force, which means, of course, that they're no longer unemployed. So notice what happens here. We've gone from 5 over 10 or 50%. Now we've got somebody who has left the labor force. They're no longer unemployed. So now our unemployed is 4. And our labor force is 9. 4 divided by 9 is 44%. Notice that when we have a discouraged searcher, we actually have a reduction in the unemployment rate. Right? So, should discouraged workers actually be counted as not in the labor force? Or is there a better way to actually, you know, think about these individuals? And then they are actually part of the more in-depth statistics that we might see in certain countries. So Canada actually does report discouraged searchers, right? So it's actually maybe throwing off those measurements a little bit. So given that we do have unemployed people, we might want to figure out what can governments do in order to alleviate the problem. So generally when you're collecting, the most basic social assistance, i.e. welfare, um, and sometimes when you're collecting unemployment insurance or employment insurance, the things that you are required to do or that are available to you uh, are good things to get you back to work. Job search programs. So job search programs are programs that the government funds. You can go into, HRSDC offices. Sometimes they're public-private, contracts or coordination between public and private enterprise. But you go in and you actually, uh, go through a job search program. When you're on the most basic social assistance, welfare, you are required to do job search programs, which means that every week you've got to go in. So you're going to be assigned a time. I got to, go in on Wednesday morning from 8 a.m. till 12 noon. And what they do in these programs is they generally have some sort of lecture on a topic. So, how to write a cover letter. And then you spend some time writing a cover letter and getting help with that. How to do cold calling. So, cold calling, different than warm calling. Cold calling is a process where you call up a company where you do not know anybody. So, how do you actually get to talk to the right person? Warm calling is where you call a company and you actually know somebody there, right? So you kind of already have an introduction of sorts into that company. Um, but that could be, or just how to write the resume. So what type of wording should you use in your resume? But a job search program, provides this, and it could be mandatory under certain social assistance programs. Training programs. Sometimes you might be on a social assistance program because of something that happened in your life. Some people who end up on employment insurance are on employment insurance because they got injured on the job, right? So you ended up getting injured on the job and therefore you can no longer do that job. It's not your fault that you got injured. So now you're going to get onto a training program. And the training program, will essentially train you in some new skill. Maybe you worked in heavy duty mechanics, so you're doing mechanics on tractors and big trucks and just large machinery. That's the type of mechanic you are, and you ended up getting injured on that job, and therefore you're no longer able to do that job. Things like heavy lifting are no longer going to be part of your future career. Right? This is a permanent injury. So you may actually get funding to go and learn a new trade. Maybe, carpentry, maybe, finishing carpentry. Finishing carpentry is where you're basically doing things like molding and interior stuff. So, the fine work. Whereas regular carpentry, like framing, is where you're framing up a house, you're hammering in nails. Maybe that's still too much for you. But ultimately, in carpentry, you're going to be lifting much lighter stuff. Right? Your injury might not get in the way of something like that. So you're essentially getting trained to do something else because of your injury that you received, your physical impairment. We also have training programs for entrepreneurship. Sometimes you can actually apply to become an entrepreneur. Hey, I lost my job, but I'm actually pretty good at what I do. I can start my own business, but I've never thought about starting a business. And then you get training on accounting, marketing, advertising, right? So you get this extra training that can help you move forward and start to do something. And then, of course, employment insurance. Employment insurance is something that you get if you lose your job, but it's not your fault. So if you are laid off, there's not enough work in the industry for you to have a job, therefore you get laid off. It's not your fault. You didn't get fired. You didn't do something, silly that caused a problem. You weren't fired from your job. You didn't quit your job. Getting fired or quitting, these are things that are your own fault. You're not going to apply or be eligible for employment insurance. But let's say that there's a downturn in a particular industry. And because of this, you know, there's firms out there. Perhaps you worked for a firm that employed 10 people, but now there's not enough work for 10 people. And therefore, 2 people are going to get laid off. And you happen to be one of them. It's not your fault that you got laid off. It's the amount of work that's available in the industry. That's not really your fault. So you get laid off from that particular firm, you're eligible for employment insurance. And what employment insurance will do, it will provide you with an income for a certain period of time. So you'll apply, you'll get a letter back saying you are eligible to receive $2,000 every 2 weeks for the next year. Well, that helps in many ways. You don't have to worry financially, right? So you know that you're going to receive every 2 weeks, you're going to get $2,000 for the rest of the year. Every 2 weeks, you'll get $2,000 for the rest of the year. So you know when it will end. And the interesting thing about this is that this is one of those cases where we get that strangeness in unemployment. Because when you fill out that employment insurance questionnaire every single week, are you actively seeking work? Yes. But if you know that you're going to be receiving $2,000 a week for the rest of or every 2 weeks for the rest of the year, how much searching are you going to do in your first week of being unemployed? The answer is probably none. What about the second week? What about the third week? What about even the eighth week? A year is 52 weeks. What about the 15th week? Right? So, interestingly, what they found is that as people near the end of their employment insurance benefits, that's when they find jobs. So, very few people actually get jobs within the first few weeks of receiving employment insurance, which seems to imply that people take advantage of that particular system. Right? They're basically saying, "Hey, I'm getting paid. I get all these days off. I'm going to go ahead and just enjoy my time, take it like a vacation." Other people argue that it is a good program because it actually allows people to find the right fit. For example, imagine that there was no employment insurance. If there was no employment insurance, then perhaps somebody like a university professor, because they've got to pay their bills, ends up taking a job, at a McDonald's. That's a little bit extreme of an example, but I think it should make the point. A university professor has to pay their bills, they take a job at McDonald's. Well, now they're working at McDonald's. How much time are they going to have to actually look for a university professor job? And the answer is not very much. So some people argue that employment insurance is a good thing because it allows people to, that relief time. Hey, I'm getting paid. I can actually find a job that works for me. Other people argue people take advantage of the system and they don't actually get jobs until really near the end of their employment insurance time. So, two sides to the employment insurance argument there. So, that covers some of the problems and issues with measurement as well as the government programs that are around to help people. Next up, we're going to be talking about some of the specific unemployment data in Canada.